It's Friday, as we are just about to dive into week 10 of our Big Ten season. And now I'm dropping some Big Ten power rankings for you to nibble on as you await the first game of this weekend tonight between Minnesota and Oregon. So to kick off our list, in the bottom half of our power rankings at number 18, I chose to put Michigan State there, Sparty. And they were idle this week, and that's probably good for them and their fans because it's not an enjoyable team to watch. I think Jonathan Smith is the worst tenured coach in the league, specifically as a Big Ten coach, not his overall accolades given in his success at Oregon State. But he's just not cut out for the league. And as a Michigan fan myself, I would hate to see him go because I have never seen a Michigan State team as unprepared and not fired up to play Michigan as these Michigan State teams have from these past two seasons. And you could say a lot of bad things about Mel Tucker, but one thing you couldn't say is that he didn't have Sparty well prepared and motivated for the Michigan game. So I hate to see Jonathan Smith go, but this team just isn't playing inspired football. The only thing I could say about them that they do good is that they sometimes make big plays when throwing to Nick Marsh. Other than that, they have a porous defense that is easy to run on, and their offensive line is really leaky. So at number 17, ahead of Michigan State, I decided to put Purdue. And, it's just because Purdue they're less talented, but they have been feisty all Big Ten season, and they actually play hard for their coach. They have good morale. They have an ability to move the ball, and they do put up some points. They are also well coached by a coach that knows how to turn a program around, especially considering what he was able to do in just a couple of years at UNLV. And this week they were able to have a respectable showing against a very dominant, talented Ohio State team that has been on a roll playing very good football. They were able to hold Ohio State to 34 points. Granted, Ohio State took their foot off the gas pedal, but which is, I think, below their average for the season, I think. And they're also able to put up a respectable 10 points, which is more than what Texas put up. And they lost by 24, which is not a huge margin. Other opponents have definitely fared worse. And, of course, you look at last week against Michigan. Granted, Michigan really shot themselves in the foot and didn't play their best offensive football. But Purdue hung in there, and the game was not put away by Michigan until the last drive of the fourth quarter. So the program is in good hands. They just happen to not have the players yet. Barry Odom, I believe, had to replace 80 players. I've heard as high as 80, as low as 50. But geez, at that point, with that amount of time, it's just getting players to fill the roster. It doesn't matter what the talent is. So logically, the talent for Purdue can only go up from here. So at number 16, I couldn't move them up very much just because of how the whole season has gone. But I have Wisconsin moving up a spot for the obvious reason of their big victory over Washington. I think Luke Fickell is probably much more relaxed now, knowing that the AD has his back going into this week, but now he has a definitive victory and probably the biggest victory in his Wisconsin tenure so far over a ranked Washington opponent who was coming off a big victory themselves over Illinois. This was a messy, old-fashioned Big Ten victory by Wisconsin as they slugged their way to victory in the rain with incredible physical play up front, especially from their defensive line, causing all kinds of havoc on Damon Williams. They also had good coverage down the field, even when they needed to, especially in the fourth quarter on the critical Washington possessions. So congratulations to Wisconsin. Unfortunately, because this is their only victory in Big Ten play, 6 games in, and their offense is still quite treacherous, I can't put them any higher than 16. And I can't especially put them any higher than the team that they lost to badly at number 15, which happens to be Maryland. But that's where most of the positive things you can say about Maryland kind of ends right now at this point. I would throw in they have a really good freshman quarterback. But you have to get rid of Mike Locksley, I think, right now. I've said it before, and I think he's been past his expiration date, if I'm being frank. And I've said it before, the window of opportunity where this Maryland program was at their best under Locksley's tenure was from 2022 to 2023, where they had an opportunity with a breakthrough season and didn't accomplish it. And it looks like they could have had it this year, but it's the same script. And he has continued with his same formula of recruiting marginally good to good receivers and good quarterbacks, but seemingly neglecting the interior on both sides of the ball. Now, I did not watch this game between them and Rutgers because I watched the other 5 and had no interest in this one given how low the stakes are and the 2 uninspiring teams. But I would not be surprised if I were to turn this game on and find out that Rutgers probably contained the line of scrimmage in this one. So it's the same old story with Maryland where they do well in non-conference, get off to maybe a good start in the first 2 games of conference play. Then they get exposed usually in the trenches by a majority of their Big Ten opponents. So I think if I were Maryland, that I would want to change from Locksley. I don't think anything's going to change as long as he's there. So at number 14, I have the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. As I said, I did not watch the Rutgers-Maryland game, but I was pretty surprised to see that Rutgers pulled out the victory after really just barely beating Purdue at the very end of regulation. Their defense has been very bad all season, but they're able to hold a pretty decent Maryland offense with good receivers and good quarterback play. So props to Rutgers defense. They did earn bowl eligibility the prior week, and perhaps they are playing inspired because of it. One thing I do know is that Kelly McManus has been playing good football this season and has come a long ways from where he was as a quarterback at Minnesota a couple years ago. So at number 13, I moved up Penn State from like 14 or 15 to 13. You got to look at the scope of the whole season. But I think after the Oregon game, everything initially was deflated from this team because that game was their opportunity as a program to really turn the corner, I think, under Franklin. And then after that letdown against UCLA, their season goals were all off the table. And now that Franklin is fired, and they were going 3-5 going into this past game against Indiana, I think they've moved past the realization that their season goals are over. They've moved past that. And I think now that game was just about pride. That was their last stand, I think, as a team for this season. And frankly, I've had this team low in the rankings, usually, as I said, most of the time at 13 and 14, based on how they've performed. But not because of what they actually have on their roster. And going into the season, we all thought they had a great offensive line that would be competing for a Joe Moore Award. They always have talent on defense at each position group. I think their secondary has taken a step back in talent, but they have bodies on defense, and especially the front seven. And they have, better recruits than Indiana does. But you could probably definitely argue that Indiana's probably may have developed their players better. But Indiana's going up against, you know, real players with real talent. They have more actual I think Penn State has more natural talent, but this team with their talent was at home, and they were motivated for this a big game like Indiana. And it was kind of a stalemate for the most part in the trenches in this game. And Penn State made some plays on defense in the second half and in the secondary with that interception. But ultimately, they just have not developed much of a passing game under Franklin over the years. And when they needed it today, they didn't execute enough plays through the air. And Indiana obviously had the advantage there, with the quarterback play with Mendoza. Really, Penn State probably should be 7-2 right now if they didn't have that midseason collapse after the loss to Oregon. But they are 3-6 now, and again, just cannot win a Big Ten game yet. And I just think it's been the lack of development of a passing game these past 3 years. But I have them moving up a little bit just from this past performance. It'll be interesting to see if this effort carries over into next week into their next game against Ohio State. So at number 12, I have UCLA. So it's difficult to place them. They looked really good in their victories, albeit against weaker opponents, but lately against good opponents, they have been dominated. And against Nebraska, it was a competitive game, sort of, but Nebraska was in control throughout the game. I still have them ahead of Penn State because they have won more big games, and they won head-to-head against them. I think this is a team with now better coaching that utilizes the strengths of this team well, especially with utilizing the tools that Nico Iamaleava has. Other than that, they have a ways to go in developing their roster, particularly on probably defense. Unfortunately, though, they do not have a very promising 2026 recruiting class, as they are ranked 57. I just know right now that they do play exciting football that is not vanilla on offense. And at number 11, I have Northwestern. First, I think we must give Northwestern some recognition for their offensive line, and particularly in their run blocking specifically. USC is not a very stout team up front on defense, but Northwestern has been consistently good running the ball throughout the season behind their O-line. They had moments in the first half against Oregon when I thought at the time that Oregon's D-line might have been suspect, but now I could say it was more about Northwestern's run blocking, as they also ran the ball well against UCLA, Penn State, Nebraska, and Purdue. And now they were able to run successfully against USC. And this was a nice, fun style clash between a finesse team with the elite receivers and an elite quarterback with a more traditional phone booth team in Northwestern. And unfortunately for Northwestern, USC's vastly superior talent in the skill positions were too much for Northwestern to overcome. But I do think Northwestern, for much of the game, had a defensive back on a USC wide receiver, but Makai Lemon and Lane were just making plays that you can only just tip your hat to and say good effort by Northwestern. Right now, it's clear that David Brom is the perfect fit for the culture of Northwestern, and there feels a continuity from Patrick Fitzgerald to now. It is difficult to get skilled players at Northwestern, so right now Brom is building the program the right way, from the inside out, first, as that is what he can currently control. Finishing off the first half of my list, it is Nebraska at number 10. I know a lot of people would expect them to be a bit higher, but you gotta respect the head-to-head with who they've played and lost to. They had a very inspiring victory, though, on the road against UCLA. UCLA is not a very good team, but they have been playing inspired since Rick Neuheisel's son has taken over as the OC. So after losing Dylan Raiola last week to injury against USC, I thought that would take the wind out of their sails as they would possibly tank the rest of the season. But boy, I'll say that TJ Lateef, whom I had never heard of until this past Saturday, really stepped in and looked really impressive. This also might be one of the best offensive performances of the year with him there. This only leads me to believe that he will be transferring after this season because his stock is probably too high to be sitting behind Dylan Raiola if Raiola is healed by the start of next season. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't comment on Emmett Johnson, as he's quietly one of the best running backs in the Big Ten, maybe the best all-around running back with his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. I think this offense has really developed and improved as the season has gone on. With that said, just based on their wins and losses and whom they have lost to, I can't really find a way to put them higher than 10. But if you're a Nebraska fan, all you care about is finishing this season strong. They have a real opportunity on the road next week against a likely mentally checked out Penn State team to get that 8th win that Nebraska hasn't had in a season since 2016. So that is the end of the top half of my Big Ten power rankings. I will immediately have part 2 out for you immediately after this part 1. Stay tuned.